Try to remember your first birthday. Try to remember the sound of your mother's voice when you were 2. Try to remember anything at all before the age of 3. You can't, and it's not because nothing happened. Something is going on inside your skull that erased an entire chapter of your existence. Not faded it, erased it. By the time you turn 3 or 4, almost everything before that point is gone, vanished as if it never happened at all. Scientists have a name for this. They call it infantile amnesia. Sigmund Freud noticed it more than a century ago and assumed something dark was hiding behind it. Some repressed trauma your mind was protecting you from. He was wrong about the reason, but he was right that something strange was happening, something so consistent that it shows up in almost every human being who has ever lived. Here's the question nobody asks. If your brain was working during those years, if you were laughing, crying, learning to walk, learning your own name, where did all of it go? The answer is stranger than forgetting. Picture a 2-month-old baby lying under a mobile, little stuffed animals swinging gently overhead. A ribbon connects the baby's ankle to the mobile. Kick your leg, and the mobile spins. Researcher Carolyn Rovi Collier ran this experiment for decades, and what she found broke the old assumption that babies are blank, memoryless little machines. Within minutes, the babies learned the trick. Kick the leg, make the mobile dance. Bring the same baby back days later, and the moment its foot touched the same crib, the kicking started again, fast and eager, before the ribbon was even reattached. The memory was there. It had survived, quietly, in a brain barely a few months old. So if babies can remember, why can't you remember being 1? The mobile experiments revealed something crucial. Infant memory is real, but it's short-lived and painfully specific. Change the crib, change the room, change the mobile's color, and the memory vanishes completely. It needs almost exact conditions to resurface. Compare that to an adult memory, something you can recall years later in a completely different context, triggered by a smell, or a song, or a stranger's laugh. Babies don't have that flexibility yet. Their memories are locked to a single key, and once that key disappears, the door stays shut forever. Change one detail in the room, swap the crib liner, move the mobile 6 inches to the left, and an infant who kicked eagerly the day before will lie there confused, as if the entire memory had simply ceased to exist. But locked is not the same as deleted, and that distinction matters more than you think. In 2014, a neuroscientist named Paul Franklin ran an experiment on mice that reframed the entire conversation. Young mice, it turns out, grow brain cells at a staggering rate, specifically inside the hippocampus, the structure responsible for stitching experiences into long-term memory. Franklin's team discovered that this flood of new neurons, while wonderful for learning new things quickly, comes at a cost. Every new neuron woven into the hippocampus circuitry can quietly overwrite the old wiring those circuits were built on. The very thing that makes a young brain such a fast learner is the same thing erasing its own early memories in real time. Picture your brain as a city under non-stop construction. New neighborhoods get built directly on top of the old ones, week after week, faster than at almost any other point in your life. There was never a moment to slow down and preserve a single block. The roads got paved over before any map could be drawn. Why would your brain build a memory system that destroys itself? Because for an infant, growth matters more than memory. You weren't anything yet, you were becoming everything, all at once, and your brain chose expansion over preservation. Franklin later tested this by slowing neuron growth in older mice and speeding it up in younger ones. The pattern matched almost exactly: boost neurogenesis, and memories fade faster, even in adult brains. Slow it down, and memories that should have vanished start sticking around. The construction crew, not the calendar, decides what survives. Then his team went further, in a way that should genuinely unsettle you. Using a technique called optogenetics, researchers can tag the exact cluster of neurons that fired during a specific memory and then reactivate that same cluster later using pulses of light. When Franklin's team did this with young mice that had seemingly forgotten a fear they had learned weeks earlier, something extraordinary happened. The mice froze in fear again, instantly, the moment those old neurons were switched back on. The memory hadn't been erased, it had been buried under new construction and disconnected from the wiring that would normally let the mouse retrieve it on its own. Does that change how you picture your own first years? Not as a quiet, sleepy blur, but as the single most violent renovation your brain will ever go through, one that may be hiding intact rooms behind walls that were simply never given a door. There's a second piece to this puzzle, and it has nothing to do with neurons. It has to do with language. Psychologist Nora Newcomb has spent years studying how memory and language grow up together. A memory of an event isn't just a sensory snapshot, it's a story, stitched together with a sequence, a setting, a sense of, this happened to me, in this place, at this time. That structure requires a vocabulary your brain hasn't built yet. Before you could speak in full sentences, you had no scaffolding to hang an experience on. The feelings were there, the faces were there, but there was no narrative thread to tie any of it together into something retrievable later as a story you could replay. Think about what that actually requires. To remember an event as yours, your brain needs a sense of time passing, a sense of self that existed yesterday and still exists today, and a way to label the experience in words it can search for later. Toddlers are still assembling all three of those tools at the exact moment the most formative experiences of their lives are happening to them. Developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson pushed this even further, arguing that autobiographical memory isn't something a child builds alone inside their own head. It's built in conversation, out loud, with another person. A parent who says, "Remember when we went to the park and the dog ran up to you," over and over, in slightly different words each time, is doing more than reminiscing. They are handing the child a template for how a memory is supposed to be shaped, narrated, and stored. Without that back and forth conversation, a child has the raw experience, but lacks the format to file it away for later retrieval. Doesn't that make you wonder what's happening inside a baby's mind right now, somewhere in a crib nearby, fully alive and feeling everything, with no way to keep any of it? Psychologist Patricia Bauer pushed this idea even further still. Her research found that toddlers can hold on to memories for months when researchers help by repeating verbal cues, almost like rehearsing a story out loud over and over until it sticks. The implication is unsettling and beautiful at once. Your earliest memories weren't necessarily incapable of survival, they simply never got rehearsed into permanence. Nobody sat you down and helped you tell the story of your own first years, again and again, until the story became real and lasting. The raw material was there, the narrator hadn't shown up yet. Here's something else worth sitting with. The age at which your memory finally switches on isn't fixed, and it isn't universal. It shifts depending on where and how you grew up. Psychologist Chi Wang has spent years comparing autobiographical memory across cultures, and she found that adults raised in cultures where families talk often and elaborately about shared past events, retelling stories, asking, "Do you remember when?" tend to report earlier first memories and far more detailed ones than adults raised in cultures where the past is discussed more sparingly. In some of her studies, the gap between average earliest memories across different cultural groups stretched well over a year. The hardware is the same everywhere. The rehearsal is not, which means the exact moment your own memory began wasn't only written by your neurons, it was written, in part, by how often someone sat across from you and helped you practice remembering, in a language you were only just beginning to understand. There's a reason the feelings can survive, even when the facts cannot, and it comes down to which part of your brain matured first. The amygdala, the small almond-shaped structure that tags experiences as frightening, comforting, or dangerous, is almost fully wired by the time you're born. The hippocampus, the structure that files those experiences away as retrievable facts, is still years from finishing construction. That gap matters enormously. It means an infant can absolutely learn that a certain tone of voice means danger or that a certain person's arms mean safety, long before that infant has any ability to store the specific event as a memory. The emotional lesson gets written in ink. The factual record gets written in pencil, then erased before it ever dries. This is why you might flinch at a sound you can't explain. It's why certain rooms feel wrong before you've consciously noticed anything wrong about them. Why a particular smell can spike your heart rate years before you can name a single reason why. Psychologists studying early attachment, building on the foundational, strange situation experiments designed by Mary Ainsworth in the 1970s, found that the bond an infant forms with a caregiver in the first year of life predicts, with striking consistency, how that same person will handle closeness, trust, and conflict decades later as an adult. None of the infants in those studies could form a single retrievable memory of the moments that built their attachment style, and yet the pattern stuck, quietly steering relationships they would form 30, 40, 50 years later, like a hand on the small of the back that nobody can see. Sleep adds one more layer to this. Infants spend an enormous share of their time in REM sleep, the stage most associated in adults with dreaming and memory consolidation, the nightly process where the hippocampus replays the day's experiences and slowly files the important ones into long-term storage. In adults, that replay process is what turns a fleeting experience into something you can recall a year later, but an infant's hippocampus, still under heavy construction, isn't yet equipped to run that consolidation process the way a mature brain can. All that dreaming, all that nightly replaying may be happening in a structure that simply cannot yet hold on to what it's rehearsing, like a film projector running every night in a room with no screen. So what does that mean for the memories you do have, the ones that start appearing somewhere around age 3 or 4? Are they even accurate? Not entirely, and this is where the story gets even stranger. Some of your earliest memories are not memories at all. They are reconstructions, pieced together from photographs you've seen, stories your family has told you, and your own imagination quietly filling in the gaps. Psychologists studying this effect have found that people will confidently describe events from early childhood in vivid sensory detail, the smell of the room, the color of a toy, the exact words someone said, even when the event in question never actually happened, planted instead by a single suggestive conversation or a photograph studied too many times. Your brain doesn't store memory the way a camera stores footage. It rebuilds the scene almost every time you recall it, like an artist repainting from memory of a memory, and early childhood gives that artist the most freedom of all, because there's so little original material left to compare against. That should make you a little suspicious of your own earliest memory, the one you've told 100 times at dinner tables. Is it really yours? Or is it a photograph someone showed you so many times that it slowly grew a soundtrack, a temperature, and a feeling of having been there? Think about what all of this means for who you are right now. The years that built your earliest sense of safety, your first attachment to another human being, your first experience of fear, comfort, hunger, and love, all happened during a window you can never consciously revisit and may never be able to fully trust, even if you could. Every adult you have ever become was shaped by a version of yourself you have no access to. You are, in a very real sense, living on top of a stranger, one whose decisions and reactions are still echoing through your personality decades later. That's why your parents' stories matter so much. You used to do this. You loved that song. You cried every time we left the room. Those aren't just nostalgic anecdotes, they're the only surviving map of a country you used to live in and can never visit again. Without someone else's memory, that country disappears from history completely, as if it had never existed at all, leaving behind only its effects, written quietly into the architecture of who you became. Open up an old photo album, or scroll through the earliest folder on a parent's phone, and notice what actually happens in your chest. You don't recognize the toddler in the picture the way you'd recognize an old friend. You study them, almost like a detective, looking for clues about who that small, unfamiliar person was. Was that really you, the one reaching for the dog, terrified of the vacuum, obsessed with a single blue cup? You have to take it on faith. There is no internal feeling of recognition waiting to confirm it, no flicker of, oh yes, I remember that exact afternoon. Just a photograph, a caption written by someone else, and the strange quiet trust that the story is true simply because the people who love you say it is. That gap is worth sitting with for a moment. Somewhere in your house right now, there may be a video of yourself taking your very first steps, a recording of the exact sound your laugh made before it deepened into the laugh you have today, a photograph of the first time you ever tasted something sweet, and your whole face rearranged itself in surprise. You will never remember any of it firsthand. The only version of that moment that will ever exist again lives in someone else's memory or in a few seconds of pixels on a hard drive, completely disconnected from your own internal sense of self. And maybe that is the real reframe here. You assume memory is what makes you who you are, but the years that shaped you most happened before memory was even possible. Your personality, your attachment style, your earliest fears, your sense of whether the world is safe or threatening, most of that architecture was built in the years you cannot remember at all. Memory came later, switching on halfway through the most important movie of your life, long after the opening scenes had already decided how the story would feel. There is something almost comforting buried inside all of this. You don't need to remember being loved as an infant for that love to have shaped you. The hands that held you, the voices that soothed you, the faces that lit up every single time you walked into a room, none of it required your memory to matter. It worked on you anyway, quietly, permanently, while you were busy becoming someone who would never consciously know it happened. Somewhere underneath every habit you have, every instinct to flinch, or trust, or reach out, there is a memory you will never recover, still pulling the strings from a room you can no longer enter. So tonight, when you try, one more time, to reach back and remember your first birthday, your mother's voice when you were 2, anything at all before the age of 3, remember this. You are not failing to find something that was never there. You are reaching for a country that built you completely and simply never let you keep the map.